Why is it that some games feel so good to play, everything works together, and you truly lose yourself in the fantasy world, compared to others that may look better, be newer, but there is just something about it that makes you regret playing or buying it? Why is that? What is it that makes them feel right? And what is it really that makes a video game great? Well, for me, there are 6 key features that need to be outstanding to make a game great, with each being important in its own right, but with some certainly being more important than others. The first of these points, and definitely the most important, is gameplay and mechanics. It's the only point in this list that is mandatory to make a great game. It can be a quite complex definition, usually being up to players and devs to define for themselves, but for this video, here's a definition I'm going to use. Gameplay is the way players interact with the game, world and character interactions, how they perform actions in the game, and the rule set that defines how gameplay occurs. So why does gameplay matter? Well, it's the entire backbone and structure upon which the rest of the game mechanics and world is built upon. But for a game to be good, it needs solid foundations to be built on. Because what is the point of going through a game with a great story if it feels terrible to play? The rule set that a game is built around is critical to make gameplay great. The boundaries that define how things happen, how the player interacts, and what the player is allowed to do really make or break gameplay. As what would happen to the game of chess if you changed one simple rule? That being, what if a pawn could also move backwards? Now the whole game of chess changes. New strategies and tactics would need to be invented, and it won't be the same chess that we have today. And it's the same with video game rule sets. How would Destiny be if the abilities had no cooldowns and were completely instant? Or if Dead Space had infinite ammo? Or even if Skyrim didn't have shouts? One simple change in the defining rules of the game would change them drastically. The progression of a game also falls under gameplay, as it's not just about story progression, but the player's progression to becoming more capable, skilled, and knowledgeable throughout. And it's a carefully balanced line in every game, as you never want the player to think a challenge or objective is completely impossible when they reach it, and you also don't want them to easily complete them. There needs to be a solid middle ground, where it feels like an adequate challenge for the player at that stage of the game. As like, imagine playing a Soulsborne game in reverse. It would be impossible for 99.999999% of players on their first time playthrough. So good progression through gameplay is vital to keep the player interested and challenged enough in the game. But now, let's take a look at the Fallout series, as it shows exactly why gameplay matters. Fallout 4 may not have the best story, best characters, graphics or world, but what it does have in the series is the best gameplay. It just feels the best to play. From shooting weapons, interacting with the environment, and movement feels so much better than any others in the series. Like, there is a reason why it is still the highest played Fallout game in the series, even though it is not the newest or the best. It all comes down to gameplay. And for all the flack that it gets for being boring, terrible mismanagement, microtransactions, cheaters, and a whole list of more, it is impossible to deny that Destiny 2 has some excellent gameplay and some of the best gunplay we have ever seen. It feels so good to drive a sparrow, use magical powers, shoot enemies with a variety of different weapons, and how perks can combine together to create so many cool and unique scenarios and ways to play. For all its genuine flaws, there can be no doubt that Destiny 2 is a great example of how to make a first-person shooter in 2024. Minecraft as well shows a completely different side to great gameplay, with a perfect sandbox for building and crafting, being something so unique, and even with its own little progression system with ore rarities, enemies and areas, it's another shining example of great gameplay with a set of rules that govern the game, that just make it feel so good to play. However, I've never been a fan of Rockstar games like GTA, Red Dead 2, etc. The shooting mechanics, movement and so on just doesn't feel as good as those games deserve. It's not that bad that it ruins the experience, as those games have so much more going for them, but no one would ever look to a GTA game or Red Dead 2 and say that the gameplay is a standout factor for what makes a game fun and worth playing. But now, let's get on to the second point of what makes a great game, and that is the world the game takes place in. Now, it's not as simple as wow, pretty world, there is so much more to what makes a great game world, and for me it comes down to 4 key points: environment, events, traversal, and openness. So let's unpack the environment. The environment of the world will be what you notice first, and it comes down to how it looks and how pretty and believable it is for the setting of the game. Take a game like the modern Tomb Raider games, it really feels like a deep forest, ancient ruins, and decrepit buildings. It makes the setting believable to the players, as it does look like a place that would hide hidden treasures, along with Cyberpunk with giant mega buildings, super futuristic vehicles, but with an underbelly of the poor and criminal, living in shacks of corrugated metal, showing through the environment the differences between the classes in Night City. The perfect setting for the story of the game. However, the setting for Destiny 2 Lightfall, mentioning it again, has such a terrible environment. Neo Muna, sure, is pretty, but mostly because it's clean. It is boring, and it doesn't look like a full-on invasion that is taking place here. The location tells us nothing about what the place is like normally, and look over there at those tall buildings, on fire, real destruction. What a war should look like. I want to be over there. And contrast this with the Cosmodrome location, full of relics from the Golden Age, buildings close to collapsing, and my favourite part has to be this massive pile-up of rusted cars. Each one was probably a family trying to escape during the collapse, and they just didn't make it. Some incredible storytelling of what happened just from the design of the environment. Events cover things that happen in the world to make it feel more alive, whether it be NPCs travelling between settlements, traffic on roads, weather patterns or seasons, to even something as simple as a bin overflowing with rubbish. All these events will contribute to making a world feel alive, making it feel like there are other people in it living their lives. It may seem like such a simple thing, and it certainly is. It isn't much, but without it, you go from a world like Night City or Los Santos to a random planet from Starfield. It would take so much away from the heart of that world, with Red Dead Redemption certainly being the best example for a world that has events, with the world changing based on what you do in the game, houses being built, people actually eating, and so much more, adding all together to make the world feel alive. Traversal is simple. It's the way you get around the game. Obviously, you have on foot for most things, but then, based on the game, you can have so many options. More medieval fantasy games will have horses, other games have cars, and even starships to pilot, but it isn't simply vehicles, but how the player can move around, how Mario can traverse the open worlds in Super Mario Odyssey, or a game like Bloodborne, where there isn't so much player freedom to traverse based on the hunter's moveset, but they all contribute to how the world will feel, making the game feel more open by allowing more free-flowing and greater movement options rather than closed off, making you feel smaller as you are surrounded by giant pieces of geometry. And moving on to the last section, last but not least, is openness, which links on from traversal, feeding into one another. And this isn't comparing open worlds to linear worlds or 2D worlds, but more player freedom and how it affects the atmosphere. Choosing how open you make the game can completely change how a player will interpret the game and can dictate how they are meant to feel. More open areas are usually seen as more freeing, happy, calming, whereas the more closed off an area or level, the creepier, the scarier, and the more worried the player will be, as inherently not knowing what is around the corner is scary. You have no idea what you'll see, and all games use this. Like Elden Ring, it has both wide open areas where you can see enemies from a long distance, but it also has the catacombs and mines where enemies could so easily come out and sneak attack you. As a 2D game, Hollow Knight plays it well as well, as the world is open in areas it needs to be, but still with those deep, dark corridors with God knows what you'll find. Probably the most important for a lot of people, and for some games it is the most important, and that is the story. What is actually going on throughout the game? What is being discovered about your character or about the world, and how are things unraveling? The story can be the make or break for a lot of titles, and for good reason. As for games with a definite story, it is what keeps players engaged, wanting them to progress, to see what happens next, to see how their actions have impacted the world and other characters. And thanks to Destiny 2 yet again, you can easily compare the same game with a great story like The Taken King, Witch Queen, or even The Final Shape, and contrast it with the dreadful stories of Lightfall. Yes, Lightfall sure had its spectacle, it had mystery, things all good stories need, but the implementation of new characters, a story that seemed to branch off to things that didn't matter to the main plot to stop our enemies getting to the mysterious veil, which was clearly laid out in the opening of the DLC. And to top it all off, such an unsatisfying conclusion as the veil is clearly shown to us, but we still have no idea what the hell it is, why we should care about it. And sure, we saw the outcome. The witness made a triangle and Kaito said we lost, but how? Like, the world hasn't ended and I have to wait another 16 months to find out the consequences of that story? Okay. It also suffers from that Raiders of the Lost Ark conundrum. If we weren't there, the main story would have happened anyway. The witness would have got the veil and gone into the Traveller. I guess it's a problem with live service games, but compare that to each of the best stories from Destiny. Taken King, Oryx comes to the system for revenge. We infiltrate his dreadnought after discovering how unpowered we are, needing to flee the Taken, discovering so many secrets about the Hive, Taken and Oryx himself. We have a clear motive of the enemy. We have seen what this enemy has done to others, showing his power, and we have to take him down. And once that happens, there are consequences straight away, that being the Taken War quest, needed to start to destroy the Taken all across the solar system. Forsaken sees our friend Cade 6 killed in cold blood, systematically hunting down each of his killers, each unique, culminating in us hunting down Aldrin Sov in the Dreaming City and discovering the secret of why he killed Cade, because he was tricked by Riven with the promises of his sister, finally taking her on in the raid, but unleashing a never-ending curse, a once unforeseen consequence of our actions. Witch Queen had so much mystery in it, with the overarching question of being how Savathûn stole the light. After each mission, finding a new piece to the puzzle until the big reveal, which was such a great idea for the story. The final shape is the actual ending to the Lightfall DLC filler, with the consequences of us losing finally being shown in the opening cutscene, discovering things that we sort of knew already, with characters battling their own emotions and identities throughout. The finale is a great ending, especially the raid and excision mission, actually being a satisfying story ending. Unlike Roots of Nightmares after Lightfall, which is certainly just a side mission for our Guardians and not really a pressing threat at all. These really show how much the story alone can impact how the game is. And sure, there are nuances with all the Destiny DLCs, but it's an easy way to show the impact a story can have. You can also look at Call of Duty games for a plethora of great and terrible stories with similar gameplay. The stories that are beloved, like the first two Black Ops titles, World at War or Modern Warfare trilogy, all had memorable characters, with an engaging plot, with twists, turns and secrets that when revealed really changed our perspectives on the whole story, whether it be Shepard's betrayal, Yuri knowing Makarov, Raul Menendez wanting to be captured on the Obama, and of course, the numbers, Mason. It is those moments that cement these stories as great, compared to Ghost, with the worst story in the series, full of stupidity, terrible dialogue, characters, and a villain that was nothing compared to the greats. Audio is probably the most underrated aspect of a game, as so many people underestimate how important sound design and sound mixing affects the feeling a game has. The original soundtrack for a game is what most people think of first when it comes to audio, and yes, that is important for creating a mood in the game, setting the tone audibly for what our eyes are seeing, but let's try something. Let's try the same scene with 3 different audio tracks. So you see how it can change the feeling of the exact same visuals and how you feel about the situation. But audio isn't only about the music in the game, but also all of the spoken dialogue and sound effects. And it's those sound effects that play the most crucial audio role for immersing us into a world. From everything like footsteps across different terrain, giving an audible difference in what the player is moving on, to different audio for firearms in shooter games. It is so important to make each weapon in a shooter feel powerful and uniquely identifiable. Let's try this again and change the audio of some weapons in Doom Eternal, arguably the meatiest sounding weapons in any game. There are also so many sound effects that play in games that hide behind pretty graphics or an excellent story, stealthily immersing us deeper into games. And you may not consciously notice them, but if they went, you feel like something is missing. And anyone who has seen those videos of Foley artists see how much of an art it truly is, and just as important as the people programming the functions of the game itself. So let's give some love to the little sound effects in your favourite games. The next point has to be the art direction of a game. And yes, this is separate to graphics, they are different. So let's get a solid definition. Art design is how the designer of a game drew an asset, not the actual amount of pixels that are used for that asset. Or as a real example, these two trees from Red Dead Redemption 2 have the same design, obviously, but the left one has a lower graphical setting than the right one. Whereas a Red Dead 2 tree versus a Borderlands tree versus a Minecraft tree, all same resolution to the best of my abilities, but clearly different designs which impact the tone of the game. Another way to think about art design of the game is texture packs on Minecraft. For the most part, they don't change the resolution, but the design of the textures. But when most people talk about a game having great graphics or looking good, what they actually mean is the game has great art design. Most are talking about the design of the environment, NPCs, and texture design, rather than the raw pixel performance or polygon count. And I won't lie that graphics don't play a role, as they certainly do, but not as much as the art design. Let's look at some games that thrive with great art design. Cuphead has some of the best art design in recent memory, taking inspiration from classic cartoons of the early 20th century, and it worked out so perfectly. Really crafted a 2D game with the main focus on the look of the game, making it a standout amongst all other 2D shooters. The Borderlands series is known for its unique cel-shaded art design with wacky characters, sometimes with wacky proportions, with an array of different environments from icy glaciers, arid badlands, lush forests, and the truly surreal alienness of the Iridian architecture. Really fitting that cartoony look, as Borderlands wouldn't really feel the same if it was photorealistic. On the other side of the world of art design is a rush to try and make games as photorealistic as possible. Call of Duty series is notorious for this, but the game that has the best art direction for a photorealistic look to me has to be Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition. It may not have the best design, character models, but wow, these environments are something else. Seeing the Volga level for the first time with the partial fog, honestly, it just blew me away on my first playthrough. But let's finally move on to the final part of this video, and the second half of art design, and that is graphics. As I mentioned before, graphical fidelity is the pixel numbers or polygon numbers for a certain asset. Another way to see it is the graphics tab on your games, mostly speaking to the PC players watching here, as consoles don't really have that. And the reason that it is last in this video out of the 6 is because it affects the game the least, within reason. The resolution of the game changes the feel of the game the least. A game like Metro Exodus in 4K versus Metro Exodus in 1080p is barely noticeable without pixel peeping, and especially in fast-paced games with a lot of movement, you simply can't tell. But obviously, as you get lower and lower in resolution like 720p and lower, games that aim for photorealism do start to become horrible to play. And don't forget, this is also very dependent on whatever screen you are using. But that graphics tab holds so many secrets with so many settings to tweak the game, with lighting and the biggest game changer being texture quality, literally changing the textures of assets to different qualities. For the most part, it does not change the feeling or enjoyability of a game, dependent on the game, as those that are slower paced, have giant open worlds, and don't benefit from being any higher than 60 FPS do usually require higher graphic settings to be enjoyable, as that is part of the experience, compared to super fast games that rely on as high an FPS count as you can get, those being competitive COD games, Rocket League, and a whole host of competitive esports titles games that focus on gameplay rather than immersing you into a lovingly crafted game world. And certainly the biggest example of why graphics aren't important than any of the other points in this video is clearly Minecraft. Look at it, the graphics are dog shit. Seeing each block broken down into 256 pixels per side. It is nothing on any game, but that is its beauty, its art direction, as I genuinely believe that texture packs that increase the resolution of Minecraft blocks actually make the game look worse, as the increased graphics genuinely for me ruin the artistic nature of the world and really take something away from the game. The biggest takeaway from this video is, yes, these are the main points in what makes a great game, but besides gameplay, none of them are mandatory. There is such a vast range of different games that excel in only one or a couple of points mentioned. Minecraft, for example, has no story, terrible graphics, but excels in gameplay, art design, and the world's departments to create a great game. A game like Red Dead 2 doesn't have the best gameplay for an open world RPG, but blows everyone away with its world, art design, graphics, and the excellent sound design for every action. Left 4 Dead 2, to me, is a purely gameplay focused game. Sure, dialogue is cool and funny, but that gameplay especially with friends, carries it that any flaws it may have in the other 5 points is completely obscured by its stellar gameplay. So genuinely, keep your mind open. Graphics don't make a great game, having a living world is nice but not required, art design is completely subjective, and audio is mostly unnoticed. All that matters at the end of the day is gameplay. But if you think I've missed anything about what makes a great game, then please leave your thoughts and comments down below, along with liking the video if you did and subscribing for more videos.